Welcome to our open book. Very good to be with you. Ah, hi there, darling. Dorothy Joy, Karen Smith, Joan Denny, Bruce Vandenbos, Marianne Smith, Judith Hambleton, John James. Good to see you again, and Karen Smith, as always. Yvonne Birch, Joan A. Denny. Yes, welcome all to Open Book. Gwyneth West, good to be with you. Well, it's, yes, we're going to read this next installment, In Cold Blood, again, tonight's 60th anniversary. So, Dick Hitchcock, Perry Smith have been on the lam. They've been to Mexico. They've been driving all over. They've been hanging papers, they say, writing bad checks, getting money, and stealing cars. And any event, they wind up in Las Vegas. Perry had something Heather Carla Atkinson sent to him, and the Las Vegas police were able to apprehend them. And agents from the Kansas Bureau of Investigation. Hi there, Margaret Peterson. Come on out and interview them. And there is a piece of evidence they have that Dick and Perry don't know. So they're talking to them about paper hanging and bad checks and that sort of thing. Then finally, here are the Kansas agents. Your uncle was the prosecuting attorney in Garden City, Kansas. Gwyneth probably knows all about this. Hi there, Kate. But Nye, who's one of the agents, in pursuit of the narrative, raised his pen, lazily slammed a shut hand against an open palm, and said nothing until suddenly he said, I guess you know why we're here. Hitchcock's mouth straightened, his posture too. I guess you realize we wouldn't have come all the way to Nevada just to chat with a couple of two-bit check chiselers. Knight closed the notebook. He, too, stared at the prisoner and observed that a cluster of veins had appeared in his left temple. Would we, Dick? What, come this far to talk about a bunch of checks? I can't think of any other reason. Hi there, Bill. Hi there, Diana. Knight drew a dagger on the cover of his notebook. While doing so, he said, Tell me, Dick, have you ever heard of the Clutter murder case? Whereupon he later wrote in a formal report of the interview, suspect underwent an intense visible reaction. He turned gray. His eyes twitched. Hitchcock said, Whoa, now hold on here. I'm no goddamn killer. Question asked, Church reminded him, was whether you'd heard of the Clutter murders. Hi there, Mr. Dickens. I may have read something, Hitchcock said. A vicious crime, vicious, cowardly. And almost perfect, I said, but you made two mistakes, Dick. One was you left a witness. A living witness who'll testify in court, who'll stand in the witness box and tell a jury about how Richard Hitchcock and Perry Smith bound and gagged and slaughtered four helpless people. Hitchcock's face reddened with returning color. Living witness. There can't be. Because you thought you'd gotten rid of everyone? I said, whoa! There ain't anybody who can connect me with any goddamn murder. Checks, a little petty thievery, but I'm no goddamn killer. Then why? I asked hotly. Have you been lying to us? I've been telling you the goddamn truth. Now and then, not always. For instance, what about Saturday afternoon, November 14th? You see I drove to Fort Scott. Yes. And when you got there, you went to the post office. Yes. To obtain the address of Perry Smith's sister. That's right. I rose. He walked around the rear of Hitchcock's chair and, placing his hands on the back of the chair, leaned down as though to whisper in the prisoner's ear. Perry Smith has no sister living in Fort Scott, he said. He never has had, and on Saturday afternoon, the Fort Scott post office happens to be closed. Then he said, "Think it over, Dick. That's all for now. We'll talk to you later." After Hickok's dismissal, Nye and Church crossed the corridor and, looking through the one-way observation window set in the door of the interrogation room, watched the questioning of Perry Smith. It seemed visible, though not audible. Nye, who was seeing Smith for the first time, was fascinated by his feet, by the fact that his legs were so short that his feet, as small as a child's, couldn't quite make the floor. Smith's head, the stiff hair, the Irish Indian blending of dark skin and pert, impish features, reminded him of the suspect's pretty sister, the nice Mrs. Johnson. But this chunky, misshapen child man was not pretty. The pink end of his tongue darted forth, flickering like the tongue of a lizard. He was smoking a cigarette. From the evenness of his exhalations, Nye deduced that he was still a virgin. That is, still uninformed about the real purpose of the interview. I was right for Dewey. This is Agent Alvin Dewey, head of the detail, and Dunn's patient professionals had gradually narrowed the prisoner's life story to events of the last 7 weeks, then reduced those to a concentrated recapitulation of the crucial weekend. Saturday to Sunday noon, November 14 to 15. The date, by the way, is, I believe, December 30th. Dewey said, "Perry, let's review our position. Now, when you received parole, it was on condition you never returned to Kansas." Either Allison Barr and Catherine Capel and Dan Harper. "The Sunflower State. I cried my eyes out. Feeling that way, why did you go back? You must have had some very strong reason." "I told you, to see my sister. To get the money she was holding from me." "Oh, yes. Yes, the sister you and Hickok tried to find in Fort Scott. Perry, how far is Fort Scott from Kansas City?" Smith shook his head. He didn't know. "Well, how long did it take you to drive there?" No response. "1 hour, 2, 3, 4? Prisoner said he couldn't remember. "Of course you can't, because you've never in your life been to Fort Scott." Until then, neither of the detectives had challenged any part of Smith's statement. He shifted in his chair with the tip of his tongue. He wet his lips. "The fact is, nothing you've told us is true. You never set foot in Fort Scott. You never picked up any 2 girls and never took them to any motel." "We did. No kidding." "What were their names?" "I never asked." "You and Hickok spent the night with these women and never asked their names?" "They were just prostitutes." "Tell us the name of the motel." "Ask Dick. He'll know. I never remember junk like that." Dewey addressed his colleagues. "Clarence, I think it's time we straighten Perry out." Dunce hunched forward. He is a heavyweight with a welterweight's spontaneous agility, but his eyes are hooded and lazy. He drawls, each wormed form reluctantly and framed in a cattle country accent. "Last soil." "Yes, sir," he said. "About time. Listen good, Perry, because Mr. Dunce is going to tell you where you really were that Saturday night, where you were and what you were doing." Dunce said, "You were killing the Clutter family." Smith swallowed. He began to rub his knees. "You were out in Holcomb, Kansas, in the home of Mr. Herbert W. Clutter, and before you left that house, you killed all of the people in it." "Never. I never. Never what?" "Never knew anybody by the name Clutter." Dewey called him a liar, and then, conjuring a card that in the prior consultation the 4 detectives had agreed to play face down, told him, "We have a living witness, Perry, somebody you boys overlooked." A full minute elapsed, and Dewey exulted in Smith's silence. From an innocent man who would ask who was this business and who were these Clutters, and why did they think he'd murdered them, would at any rate say something. But Smith sat quiet, squeezing his knees. "Well, Perry, you got an aspirin?" I took away my aspirin. "Feeling bad?" "My legs do." It was 5:30. Dewey, intentionally abrupt, terminated the interview. "We'll take this up tomorrow," he said. "By the way, do you know what tomorrow is?" "Nancy Clutter's birthday. She would have been 17. Let me read just a little bit more. Capote goes on. "She would have been 17. Perry, sleepless in the dawn hours, wondered," he later recalled, "if it was true that today was the girl's birthday, and decided no. That was just another way of getting under his skin." By the way, it was true. Like the phony business about a witness, a living witness, there couldn't be. Or did they mean, if only he could talk to Dick, but he and Dick were being kept apart. Dick was locked in a cell on another floor. Listen good, Perry, because Mr. Dunce is going to tell you where you really were. Midway in the questioning, after he'd begun to notice the number of allusions to a particular November weekend, he nerved himself for what he knew was coming, yet when it did, when the big cowboy with the sleepy voice said, "You were killing the Clutter family," well, he damn near died, that's all. He must have lost 10 pounds in 2 seconds. And God, he hadn't let them see it, or he hoped he hadn't. And Dick, well, presumably they'd pulled the same stunt on him. Dick was smart, a convincing performer, but his guts were unreliable. He panicked too easily. Even so, and however much they pressured him, Perry was sure Dick would hold out unless he wanted to hang. And before you left that house, you killed all the people in it. It wouldn't amaze him if every old grad in Kansas had heard that line. They must have questioned hundreds of men and no doubt accused dozens. He and Dick were merely 2 more. On the other hand, well, would Kansas set 4 special agents 1,000 miles to pick up a small-time pair of parole violators? Maybe somehow they had stumbled on something, somebody, a living witness. That was impossible. He'd give an arm, a leg to talk to Dick for just 5 minutes, and Dick, awake in a cell on the floor below, was, he later recalled, equally eager to converse with Perry, to find out what the punk had told them. Christ, neither Kathy Blackburn. You couldn't trust him enough to remember even the outline of the Fun Haven alibi, even though they discussed it often enough. And when those bastards threatened him with the witness, 10 to 1 the little spook thought they meant an eyewitness, whereas he, Dick, had known at once who the so-called witness must be. Floyd Wells, his old friend and former cellmate. Serving the last week of his sentence, Dick had plotted to knife Floyd, stab him through the heart with a handmade shiv. What a fool he was not to have done it, except for Perry. Floyd Wells was the one human being who could link the names Hickok and Clutter. Floyd with a sloping shoulder, an inclining chin. Well, Dick thought he'd be too afraid. The son of a bitch was probably expecting some fancy reward or parole, money, or both. But hell would freeze before he got it, because a convict's tattle wasn't proof. Proof is footprints, fingerprints, witnesses, a confession. Hell, if all those cowboys had to go on was some story that Floyd Wells had told, then there wasn't a lot to worry about. Come right down to it, Floyd wasn't half as dangerous as Perry. Perry, if he lost his nerve and let fly, could put them both in the corner. That was the nickname people in the Kansas Pen gave to what was where hangings took place. And suddenly he saw the truth. That was Perry he ought to have silenced. On a mountain road in Mexico or while walking across the Mojave. Hi there, Kate. Why had it never occurred to him until now? For now, it was much too late. I'm just going to read a little more. This is really neat. Ultimately, at 5 minutes past 3 that afternoon, Smith admitted the falsity of the Fort Scott tale. It was only something Dick told his family, so we could stay overnight, do some drinking. See, Dick's dad watched him pretty close, afraid he'd break parole, so we made up an excuse about my sister. It was just to pacify Mr. Hickok. Otherwise, he repeated the same story again and again, and Dunce and Dewey, regardless of how often they corrected him and accused him of lying, could not make him change it, except to add fresh details. The names of the prostitutes, he recalled today, were Mildred and Jane, or Joan. They rolled us, he now remembered, walked off with all our dough while we were asleep. And even though Dunce had forfeited his composure, he had shed, along with tie and coat, his enigmatic, drowsy dignity, the suspect seemed content and serene. He refused to budge. He'd never heard of the Clutters, or Holcomb, or even Garden City. Across the hall in the smoke-choked room where Hickok was undergoing his second interrogation, Church and I were methodically applying a more roundabout strategy. Not once during this interview, now almost 3 hours old, had either of them mentioned murder, an omission that kept the prisoner edgy, expectant. They talked of everything else. Hickok's religious philosophy. I know a lot about hell. I've been there. Maybe there's a heaven, too. Lots of rich people think so. The sexual history, and once more the history of his recent cross-country pilgrimage. While we kept going like that, the only reason is we were looking for jobs, couldn't find anything decent. So I worked one day digging a ditch. Things unspoken were the center of interest, the cause. What's that? I don't know. Hitchcock knew. Presently, he shut his eyes and touched his lids with trembling fingertips. And Church said something wrong. He said a headache, like at Real Bastards. Then Nye said, "Look at me, Dick." Hickok obeyed with an expression the detectives interpreted as pleading with him to speak, to accuse, and let the prisoner escape into the sanctuary of steadfast denial. When we discussed the matter yesterday, you may recall me saying the Clutter's murders were almost a perfect crime. The killers made only 2 mistakes. The first one was they left a witness. The second, I'll show you. Rising, he retrieved from a corner box and a briefcase, both of which he'd brought into the room at the start of the interview. Out of the briefcase came a large photograph. This, he said, leaving it on the table, is a 1-to-1 reproduction of certain footprints found near Mr. Clutter's body. And here, he opened the box, are the boots that made them. They're your boots, Dick. Hickok looked, then looked away. He rested his elbows on his knees and cradled his head in his hands. Smith, said Nye, was even more careless. We have his boots, too. And they exactly fit another set of prints. Bloody ones. Wow. That's breathtaking. I think I'll leave it there tonight. Maybe pick it up tomorrow if people would like that. For Scott for the readings. Yeah, oh my. Could the witnesses be the footprints? Boom, boom. Wow. It's an extraordinary work, and I'm appreciating it all over again. I'm so glad to have everyone with us. Thanks very much for being with us on our open book, and we will see you later. Thanks for all the nice comments today about my essay too. So thanks. See you later. Take care. Bye bye.